Yo guys, welcome back to another video. The EB02 Bonney guide is finally finished. Yay! Sorry it took me a little while. I've been really busy lately. This is going to be similar to my other guides. This is going to be a more kind of general guide, show you the key cards, the matchups, some deck lists, how to build, what to think about when building for this meta and as the meta changes. And in this video, I'm going to be focusing on the green-purple Luffy matchup for EB02. I actually am starting a Metafy, and I'm going to have an EB02 Bonney guide up on there for free for all of you guys that will have a little bit more information on a lot of the other matchups, like how to approach like Shanks or Lucci or Blackbeard. And if you're interested, please check that out. It's going to be free up on there, so give that a follow and support me if you'd like. But for today's video, we're going to be kind of just focusing on green purple Luffy and talking about the meta as a whole and the deck list that I think will have a good shot at being successful in the Western EB02 meta. So without any further ado, let's just jump in and let's get started. Alright, to kick things off, let's go over what we'll be talking about. So we have the new and key cards for the meta. I'll give you some deck list examples, the full GP Luffy matchup breakdown and tips and tricks for that matchup, and then my final thoughts and advice. So jumping right into it, these are essentially like new cards that can be played in the deck from the EB02 set. We have the 7-cost Bonney and the 2-cost Search Event, and I have some feelings about these cards. I know a lot of people write off 7-cost Bonney as just like a bad card. I don't think she's a bad card, and I think she has different use cases than 5-cost Bonney, where 5-cost Bonney is a more versatile mid-game card. 7-cost Bonney is a more a stickier, like semi-mid to late game card that can actually help you in a lot of matchups, like against Black or especially against stuff like Shanks. It's a lot harder to remove, and when paired with cards like Cavendish or you know, playing this plus a blocker and just getting the restand for the Dawn can be very, very strong. I don't think it's 100% necessary in all these lists. If you don't like it, if you don't want to play it, I don't think that's a problem. I don't think you have to run this card, but I do think there are some kind of like untapped potentials with this card that I think you should really experiment trying it out. At least try it out at 2 or 3 in your list, and then go from there, see how you like it, and see how it affects. Try out different like styles and different combos that you can do. Personally, one of my favorite things back when I was playing EB02 in Japan was like doing on 10 Dawn, playing something like Cavendish, and then this Bonney, and still getting the one Dawn restood at the end of your turn. Just little things like that. It's really good against Shanks because it's 7 cost, 7k power, so it's hard to get rid of with Beckman or Rayleigh. They have to like power reduce it first. But yeah, just give it a shot. That's all I'm saying. The 2-cost Search Event, I have tried this a million times, at least in the EB02 meta. Again, I think this is a card that you should experiment with and test it out, see if you like it. I have tried it in a lot of different ways, in a lot of different lists. I have thrown it into other lists that I was already liking, and I have like built decks around this card to try and use it so that you never whiff and so that you can always have a good search target. And unfortunately, it's always just like a pretty heavy brick that is just, to me, never seems worth it for whatever kind of advantage you might gain. And in a deck like Bonney that you're already trying to run a lot of top end and a lot of bricks, another brick that is really hard to play when you draw it when you're just not on curve or turn 1 going second, just normally ends up not being worth it for me, even with a trigger that activates the card effect. So, but again, don't let me be the person to tell you not to play this card. I think you should try it. I think you should. It's really cool. Like, it can be really strong, and in certain builds I think it is pretty useful and pretty clutch. But for me, I just ended up not keeping this in any of my deck lists. So those are like the new actual cards that you might be considering, and then we can talk about these, which are other EB02 cards. So there is the new Nami. You're going to be seeing this run in stuff like green purple Luffy or red green Law or yellow green Law. But the thing is there's not really a straw hat Bonney list that I think is really solid enough. Maybe if there's a meta where like 9-cost Zoro is just, you know, there's not a lot of removal and 9-cost Zoro goes ham, you could run this Nami searcher, but not really sure. And then I just thought I'd throw in this Buggy because it's cool, and like just imagining Bonney leader swinging with double attack just makes me laugh. So yeah, these are other green cards that, like, I don't know, and some spicy builds you might think about. But those are the new cards from EB02. Next, I want to start talking about all the key cards for the EB02 meta, and Right off the bat, I want to start off with talking about Arouge, because Arouge is a card that kind of started to see less and less play throughout OP9 and OP10. And somewhere along the way, like midway through EB02 over here in Asia, you started to see a lot of Bonnies starting to tech this back in at like 1 or 2, then 2 to 3, and then like 3 to 4. Like 2 to 4 was like the sweet spot, because he's just so good against green purple Luffy, and we're going to talk about it more, but I just wanted to highlight him real quick because this is a card, and people have already been taking this back in OP10, because you just kind of see the value, especially after the bans, once like Ice Age and all that stuff is gone. With removal taking a slight hit, a card like Arouge can really excel again. So these are the key cards for the EB02 meta, and I've broken them up slightly. So these are what I consider to be like the green purple Luffy techs. Again, you have Arouge, which just really helps out your odd curve and gives you the ability to kind of put that one extra Dawn that you would normally just have to leave up for leader effect, put it on leader to swing the 6k that you need to attack their leader. This is really important against 6k leaders, and like a little goes a long way when the 1 or 2 3k counter they would be saving throughout a game just because their leader is 6k, when you can't swing with your own 5k base leader. It all starts to add up, and the more you can take away that advantage from them, the more it pays off in the end, and the more it makes your lethal turn go through more easily, because they're gonna have less counter, less cards in hand. It is just very flexible too. I think, you know, just being able to play this like in combination with stuff like Cavendish, you know, it's just like, you know, Bonney things, really strong. I don't think it's 100% necessary, but I would love, I feel good having this between 2 to 4 copies in most of my EB02 lists. Next we have Carrot, just a key card in the green purple matchup. It's a good defense against aggro, because you might see Zoro and Bella Betty kind of rise up a little bit to tackle and try and face green purple if he becomes kind of a major threat in the meta. And just a good all-rounder 5 cost, you know. There's not much to say about Carrot. Those are kind of the things she's always been good for and always will be. So next we got Hody. Hody is the Goaty Jones. You're gonna start noticing EB02, and then once blue purple Luffy comes out in the West, I don't know in what capacity, like the meta will be different, you guys will have different cards, but it just doesn't take away the fact that Gum Gum Giant is a broken event, and Hody Jones is literally one of the only cards we have to kind of like answer that Dawn and answer blockers plus a Dawn. He's just the best finisher. He's the best green card in the game, in my opinion. He's my favorite card in the game. And I just, this is 4. I run him at 4. I think you need to run him at, if you can run him at 3 if you really want, if you really can make those ratios work, but for me it's a 4 of in EB02. ACOS Kid, a card that has seen less and less play throughout OP9 and OP10, I think is going to really shine again, because this is all with the kind of speculation that green purple Luffy will be at the top and will be one of the most played decks, which in my opinion I think he will be. Yeah, Kid Stonks are back. They're back up, baby. He's a key card against GP, slightly more versatile even in a KO meta, with like the, you know, banning of Ice Age and Moria makes him a little bit more flexible. We have 3 cost Tashigi now to keep him alive, and like still is a decent card against black with 2 cost Rosie and Tashigi, as long as you have maintained tempo before then. If like you're only playing Kid and Rosinante, they normally have the ability to just get rid of that, and then you're left with nothing. But if you're able to have good enough tempo early mid game, essentially stalling a turn with Kid is actually not that bad. It still is really bad against red Shanks and like power reduction decks. Not good against red green Smoker if they're running a lot of Mole Pistol, but you know, he's, you know, can't win them all, right? He's still a really strong card and one of your key cards for green purple Luffy. All right, moving on. These are more like general cards for the EB02 meta. 10 cost Dofi is another option, especially if you don't have 8 cost Kid against stuff like green purple Luffy. A lot of us in Asia started taking him back in just as like a nice plan B when we couldn't draw ACOS Kid, or if they had a Gamma Knife or something. you still need to have some characters on the board. Again, ACOS Kid is never really the best play if it's all you have, right? But say you have a Cavendish and a Carrot, you play down Kid. Oh no, they have a Gamma Knife, you can't protect it. Kid goes, but then maybe you can back it up with a 10 cost Dofi plus Cavendish or a Rouge that you have on the board. That lets you survive another turn, and then the following turn after that you have the Hody to go for game. Whereas if you didn't have Dofi, you wouldn't have been able to stun the characters in the leader, and you would have just lost that next turn, right? So in the end, he is just another stall card, but in a meta where, like, you know, aggro and like semi-swarm decks are like very prevalent, he's still a good choice. A little slow, like sometimes you don't always have the ability to play him safely, but with you know, 5-cost Smoker and a Rouge and Cavendish, normally when you do play him, you can get that Dawn back up. So you know, it's still a really good plan for that. 5-cost Bonney is another card that you can consider because she's good against black, you know, great against black, good against GP, good against Shanks, a very versatile tech card, but not 100% necessary. So that's why I would say it's just more of a general use one. Luna, Electrical Luna, you're probably going to see a lot of GPs running this, especially for the mirror. And if Dofi is still very present, I think Luna is a good card you can include in GP. I do think Electrical Luna is more of a card that we were using in Asia a lot for the Dofi matchup, more so than just the mirror. And I think that's a little bit of a misconception too. So I don't think Luna is actually 100% necessary in Green Purple Luffy for the Western EB02 meta, especially if stuff like Shanks and Lucci are going to be like really up in the meta. I know Luna can be clutch sometimes against stuff like Lucci and Blackbeard in the right situation with the right board state, but at the end of the day, I don't think it's always worth running. It just depends on the meta and like how many of the actual top meta matchups you're going to be using it for. So with that being said, if there's a ton of GP and you don't like having to rely on Dofi because he's too much of a late game option, you can just run Luna. So mid game, before you just get like bombarded with 1,000 attacks, you could play something like Luna. If you have a Cavendish on the board, play Luna, then you swing your Cavendish and like play a blocker. Then you've essentially just like, you're just proactively, I mean, it is a stall card, but it's more proactive than 10 cost Dofi in my opinion, right? So that's something to consider, and that's like the use case that I would look out for to actually being able to use it strongly. I don't think you should just blindly put Electrical Luna in any deck just because you think it's like what should be run. You need to think about how you'll actually be able to use it. If there's a ton of GP, then it's fine in GP. If there's a ton of, and Bonney, but just, yeah. That's one card that I think people might be looking to the Eastern lists, and just like copying it, but just keep that in mind when you're considering running Luna. Another card is ACOS Rosie. I've actually been trying him again recently. I played him a bit in EB02 over here in Japan, but it just didn't work out as much as I was hoping it would. But I've been having a lot better success with him, just testing with the Western meta, especially with like black just being weaker feels really great. And if there's less Blackbeard in the meta, then I think ACOS Rosie could be a huge thing, because he's kind of like, if you don't want to play 10 cost Dofi and you don't want to play Luna, ACOS Rosie is kind of a nice middle ground, because you're still playing the character, right? And then playing like a Bonney or a Carrot or a Cavendish off of this, even against Green Purple Luffy, if they're, you know, even when they're putting on the pressure, just feels great. Because if you have the Bonney or the Carrot, you're stunning something. And then against black, like the classic ACOS Rosie and a 5-cost Bonney is still really great. Yeah, it does still suck, like if you don't see him on curve and you just draw him as like one of your last cards of the game when you really don't need it, you don't need another brick in hand, it really sucks. So because of that and the problems that have always persisted with running ACOS Rosie, I don't think he's 100% necessary. And it does require you to like really adjust your ratios to the point where you have enough 5 costs and you have like strong enough 5 costs. Like I really like running 5-cost Bonney if I'm running Rosie. So if you don't have room for Bonney, I don't think you really have room for Rosie, and vice versa. It's not like it's hard to put strong 5 costs in a Bonney deck. That's like what the deck like partly revolves around, but it does mean that you have to like make certain decisions just based on that one card. Moving on, Tashigi, I mean, there's not much to talk about here. Just a 4 of the anti-removal dream card. Hawkins, still strong against black. Shanks, especially Usopp, and a decent card against Blackbeard. I'm a big fan of Hawkins for that matchup, but it is still a little slow. I think 1 to 2 is fine if you want to run him. I would just kind of like look at the meta and get a read and see if you could do that. and still a great blocker that works amazingly with the Rouge for like your odd curve. If you can do like, you know, 246, maybe search, or you could even do blocker, Rouge, Hawkins, and just have like a really like tanky board by the time you get to your like 8 Dawn turn. But yeah, something to consider. I don't think it's necessary, but still a really strong card in my opinion. Like if there's a ton of Lucci or something, maybe you consider running like 2 Hawkins. 5-cost Smoker, still a great card, amazing pressure, has the banish, a great tempo swinger against Shanks because they can't get rid of it on curve, and good against Blackbeard and the general meta, but it's counterless, so it's hard to include any more than 2 to 3 copies. This has always been and always will be the problem with 5-cost Smoker and Bonney. And I think when you need a slightly more defensive build against stuff like green purple Luffy, this is one of the cards that you can consider taking out. One of the things though is that I like in my 8-cost Rosie builds is having 5-cost Smoker. If I'm going first, I love to play it on curve because it gets this like pressure that you can get counter out of their hand from swinging at life, or just press board like 7k into a 6k or 7k into a 7k isn't really the best, but like just having that 7k line makes it much harder for green purple Luffy to swing into Smoker. And then if you have the 8-cost Rosie to back it up later, you can play your Carrot or Cavendish there and still kind of like make it in time tempo wise, if that makes sense. An amazing card, but one that like kind of gets put on the chopping block. We over in here in Japan in OP11, a lot of people started taking Smoker out just because it was a little harder to run in aggro metas, and because it's just a counterless, and if you need more top end, then it's hard to run Smoker because then you're just running too many bricks. And 9-cost Shanks, still, you know, the best answer for red Shanks. A little slow, but it's just such a reliable KO card and finisher with the 11k attack that Shanks has just become, in my mind, such a solid staple for the Bonney deck in almost any meta. It's crazy. Like he's never like outside of like the Shanks matchup, he doesn't ever feel like too necessary, but like whenever I take him out of a deck that I'm testing, I always kind of feel like I want him back in. And I think he's low-key amazing against Black / Lucci. Being able to KO a Jack on curve and have that 11k beater is just so strong, and I think if you use him in the right way, if you use him like effectively, he just does wonders for the Bonney deck. So that's why I still think he's one of the key cards for the EB02 meta. A little slow for the GP matchup, but honestly, if you get down a Kid first and then you still have a Cavendish on board, playing something like Shanks to KO there, especially if they're running Luffy Taro, if you KOing the Luffy Taro or a 6-cost Luffy, say they use the Marigo stage to boost their 6-cost Luffy to an 8-cost so that your Carrot can't stun them. Just having Shanks to come on the board and KO it right away is like sometimes will save you and like win you the game because you got rid of that threat. So that's just something to think about too. All right, and the last little group here are the blockers, the chump blockers essentially. So I just organize them like this. Beige I think is still really good. Beige is just, he's such a clutch card. He's really good. The main thing I love him for in the EB02 meta, especially in the green purple Luffy matchup, is just being able to throw it down to protect your Cavendishes and Carrots, because if you swing too early with the Carrot or Cavendish, your opponent will just bully the Cavendish, and you're gonna have to decide right then and there, do I give up a bunch of counter or do I just let it go because I need the counter for my 8-cost Kid, which often leads to a strategy, and sometimes the right thing to do is just not to swing, but then you're losing pressure that you could be putting on things. So just, you know, he's the great 1-cost blocker that really just helps pad everything and makes you feel a lot safer with your board. The only thing is like he's just not good against Black. You know, 3-cost Brook just destroys this card. It's a free target whenever they play 4-cost Lucci, so if there's a lot of Lucci, I would not consider, I would just probably not run this. 2-cost Killer, great resource advantage, just a reliable supernova blocker, and in my opinion, just in general, like the safest blocker to play in Bonney, because if you set up your board correctly and you get the Dawn on him, like just being able to draw the card is so strong. And I think if you play like to your outs of being able to use him efficiently, he can just be so strong. And then we got the kind of less picked choices here with Bardo, 3-cost Bardo. Obviously great for cycle. In my opinion, he's the hardest blocker to play correctly in Bonney. And what I mean by that is like he's 2-cost killer is kind of hard to set up, right? But I mean, if you don't get the draw effect, it's whatever, right? He's still a good 2-cost blocker. 3-cost Bardo is harder because it's 3-cost, it's 3 Dawn. It's harder to get down at the right time. Sometimes you have to make a decision: do I play Bardo or do I play 3-cost Tashigi? And that can like literally win or lose you the game based on which one you pick. Because sometimes Tashigi was better for the KO that would be coming, but then sometimes Bardo saves you because that means you have 2 blockers down when you play your 8-cost kid, and that Gamma Knife, you're like able to defend it or something, right? So there's tons of situations where stuff like this is hard to set up for, and you have to kind of make a decision turn 2, turn 3, turn 4, like that will affect the rest of the game. And just like setting yourself up to where you will actually be able to use his cycle effect is difficult in my opinion. But you know, it's good against Shanks and Blackbeard, but not always the most efficient because of 3-cost, right? Then last, I want to talk about this Rosie. And this is great against decks that can rest blockers, which would, you know, like it's not as good as 2-cost Rosie, because even if 2-cost Rosie is rested, it can still save your character, like in any situation. But this character is good because, like, if you know, if Green Purple Luffy's playing the 4-cost Green Zoro, and they say you only have a killer behind your kid, like next to your kid to protect it, if they rest your killer and then swing huge numbers in with the rest of their Dawn, there's nothing you can do, right? And if you have this, it doesn't matter if they rest it. Usohachi, 4-cost Zoro, none of it matters. You're going to be able to restand it, which is really, really nice. And if you put it down beside 8-cost Kid, they can't even do the play like... sometimes people know like how to kind of play around this a little bit, where if you're swinging, they can just swing into it, and even if you restand it, the attack is still going into Rosie. So if you don't counter out properly, you still just lose the character, right? But yeah, at the end of the day, like even if that happens, it's still blocking, it's still doing its job, right? Good against Shanks and Blackbeard because these 4K power lines are great against stuff like Rayleigh. They don't get that free KO where they do against Killer and Rosie, the 2-cost Rosie. The only downsides are it's unsearchable in a Supernova build, and if people know how to play around it a little bit, it can make it a little bit less strong on your side. But that's it for the blockers. There's one more card I want to talk about, and I love Zoro. I love 9-cost Zoro, but he's always, in my opinion, very meta dependent, and like you have to, I think the people that can read the meta the best know when the 9-cost Zoro, I think, will actually work in a build. And obviously if there's just a ton of Blackbeard, sure, you can like run Zoro, something like that, right? But I think there are more nuanced ways to kind of explore and tech this card into your deck as well, and I'm still learning how to do that as well. In OP11, this card has been run as like a 3 or 4 of for almost the entire meta, just because it's like one of our only win cons against Blue Purple Luffy. And in doing that, I've actually like learned how to play Zoro better in like more modern Bonney builds. And this card is actually amazing against Green Purple Luffy. You might not have expected it. I didn't expect it to be. So because of that, I think it's like potentially an unexplored, really good card in EB02. It's an amazing finisher. The thing that Zoro can do that obviously like 8-cost Kid is defensive. 9-cost Zoro is very offensive. Green Purple Luffy, you're going to be getting them down to 2 life basically no matter what, because they're just going to take the first 2 life. And then after that, you know, it's much harder. It goes from like taking 2 life extremely easily to like getting them down to 1, potentially 0, and then how many Gum Gum Giants do you have, right? One card that kind of just says like I don't care how many Gum Gum Giants you have is Zoro. And if you are able to, essentially the way you do it to make this very strong against Green Purple Luffy, and it's a little bit harder when they're running the 4-cost Green Zoro, so this is something to keep in mind, is just playing a lot of blockers early. And it's kind of like OP7 style, where you would play like Arouge, Hawkins, something Zoro, like that kind of thing, and you would have like this really good defense. So you're playing Zoro when you're still at 2 or 3 life, where you're not afraid of losing, right? And you know you can just like kind of go for game the next turn. If you play in a style that's similar to that, it's really, really good against Green Purple Luffy, because let's say you have, especially if you still have your Carrot or Cavendish, a blocker or 2, and then you put down your Zoro, your Green Purple Luffy opponent has to essentially be like, okay, either I go for game right now, or I potentially just lose on the crackback. and it's going to be harder for them to be able to judge if they can survive another turn, because one thing you can always do as well is if you're at 2 to 3 life, they try and go for game. If you play everything correctly, you go down to 0, but you have a ton of cards in hand, and if you have the ACOS kid, you can always put that behind Zoro and survive another turn. You know, just make sure you can. It takes careful planning on your part too, but the pressure that Zoro puts and is able to like just finish games against green purple Luffy is kind of like amazing. It's like kind of surprising how much that card actually puts a clock on GP, and instead of like us just being reactive and trying not to die, you're taking it one step ahead of them and just being like, no, I'm putting you on the defensive now. So if you don't have your Gum Gum Giants, or if you brick, you just lose. So really, really good. And of course, it's just, you know, it's a pressure card. If Shanks is low, and Shanks and Lucci essentially are lower in the meta, and stuff like Green, Purple, and Blackbeard are higher in the meta, 0 to 3 copies. You can consider playing it, right? You know, and when you have a Rouge and low cost blockers, the chump blockers, it makes it easier to set up and play at a healthy life total. So all that stuff I just talked about, I don't want to harp too long on this. I think he's a good option, a potential card to think about in certain metas. If we come out the gate and Shanks and Lucci are just at the top of the meta, don't play Zoro. Like, I don't think that's a good call. Maybe one, you could do the cheeky 1 or 2 of, but that might just hurt your consistency overall. So again, I just wanted to highlight one of the strong instances that I think it's actually really good against stuff like Green Purple Luffy, and obviously can be a strong card against Blackbeard. But that's it for Zoro. Let's move on to the actual deck list examples. All right, I have 3 lists for you guys that I want to show you and kind of go over what I think like the main use cases for all of them are, and for what metas they're kind of teched for. So the first one is essentially like a heavy GP Luffy meta, and kind of like an all-rounder general build. You can see we have 3 Rouges and 1 7-cost Bonney. I do think 7-cost Bonney is strong against stuff like GP Luffy, and it's still strong against Shanks and Black in certain situations too. But this could be a 4th Rouge if you'd like. It could be another 2k counter. It could be another blocker. You'll notice there's no 2-cost killer. So if you don't like running the beige because it's counterless, you could run killer or Bardo. A lot of these things I'm showing you, these don't have to be the exact list. This is for you to get inspiration, to understand why I'm using these cards, and then tech it and change it for how you'd like. The 10-cost Dofi is essentially a little bit of a flex spot. This could be Luna if you'd like. This could be ACOS Rosinante if you'd like, but if you run Rosie, I would suggest changing around some of the ratios, adding more 5 costs, etc. But again, this is, and one of the key things here is there's 4 ACOS kids. So this is essentially like GP Luffy's best deck in format. It's the most represented deck, and you just are in a tournament, you're like, I know I'm gonna hit some Lucci, I know I'm probably gonna hit some Shanks, but I really want to make sure I win every single GP Luffy match. Something like this could be a consideration, and that's why I have the 10-cost Dofi, is because Dofi does still help us against Shanks and Lucci, which are 2 counters to Green Purple Luffy. So in the end, like, you're teching for the best deck in format, but you're also having a little bit of tech with Shanks and Dofi for the other cards that will be trying to, or the other decks that will be countering GP Luffy. Let's move on to the next one. This is like a heavy Lucci and Shanks meta. So say the first couple of weeks GP pops off, and then Lucci and Shanks just counter him, but then they start to counter him so much that they take over and become like the top 2 decks in the meta. And this is maybe like right before like Blackbeard would sneak in and then become like pseudo best deck in format for a couple weeks. What we're running here is 2 5-cost Bonnies. We have the 3 8-cost Rosies. This is kind of the build I was talking about, where like if you have all these strong 5 costs, you run this Rosie and you're running 3. You could run 2, but when I run 2, I just don't see him on curve enough. I'd rather just take the chance of kind of like sometimes seeing him when I don't need him, to see him when I do need him more, if that makes sense. This 2-cost killer could be Bardo. Especially if there's a lot of Shanks, it could be Bardo. It could be the 3-cost Rosie if you don't mind it not being searchable. And we still do have 2 8-cost Kid here, just because obviously he does help out in a pinch. And I do think Kid is like okay against Lucci and Black. He's not like the worst card. You just have to be able to set him up correctly. And then of course, like, all these lists are gonna have 4 Hody. This one has 4 Shanks, obviously anticipating a lot of Shanks and Lucci. Like I said, I actually think 9-cost Shanks is amazing against Black and can just, you know, get you the tempo you need back sometimes. And then this also runs 3 5-cost smoker. So if you like a more anti-KO style build like this, check it out. Like try something out like this. Yeah, let's move on to one more I have. This is a little bit different. I thought I'd take a stab at showing you guys like a kind of more experimental build. Off rip, you'll notice there's no Bonney searcher. I know that's been kind of popular. I've been trying it a little bit in OP11 too, because there's been pockets in the meta where I feel like 8-cost kid is just completely irrelevant, and I've just been running more chump blockers instead of the Bonney because we're running like 4 9-cost Zoros anyway. So this is taking like a slightly similar approach, but this in my opinion would be like a heavy GP Luffy and Teach meta. So like the Lucci and the Shankses came up, but then Blackbeard just starts beating those. And because Teach is rising, then GP Luffy is rising back up. These are all like anticipations that I would have. If I saw the meta reshaping into that type of situation, this is a deck that I would maybe consider, because we have 3 5-cost smokers, 2 Zoros, you know, for the cheeky like GP Luffy finisher, or just to have against Teach, and 2 Hawkins here, just because I think he would be good. Hawkins is a good general card too, but just for Teach, just to have another blocker against GP. We have 2 Rouge, 2 Hawkins, 3 Shanks, 2 Zoro, 3 Kids, 4 Hody. I mean, we have 8 chump blockers and then 4 non-chump blockers. So, you know, not bad. 12 blockers plus 3 kids. That's pretty good. It's pretty defensive, but you can also try and be offensive with stuff like Smoker and Zoro. I don't think the ratios are perfect. This is something I would say, like, take something like this and, you know, alter it to how you like. But I just wanted to show something like this and do an experimental build without the Bonney search, because I do get a lot of questions about that. I do think in certain metas it's okay not to run Bonney searcher, but I'm gonna just say right now, I think in a meta where GP Luffy is potentially the best deck in format, I think Bonney searcher is necessary. I would run 4. I would run 4 in like every single EB02 build that I was running, unless I just had consistent success with a build like this. But again, like, I just think Kid is so important. Finding the blockers is so important. Finding your counter is so important. And just the fact that, you know, getting a Bonney down behind a Kid or early game to act as a pseudo blocker really does go a long way as well. It's not just the search aspect. But yeah, those are 3 decks that I think are interesting and kind of hopefully give you an idea of what to use into certain metas, and hopefully showing you maybe how to like start reading the meta if you're not used to doing that as well. But yeah, those are 3 deck lists that you can use or tweak, change those how you'd like. But let's jump over and look at like the EB02 Bonney matchup chart. All right, real quickly, I want to go over what I consider to be Bonney's EB02 matchup spread. Again, take everything here with a grain of salt. These are mostly based off of my experiences with how EB02 went for me over here in Japan, and how I think it's gonna go for everyone in the West. But I mean, it's not that much of a different meta. Most of the matchups I think are like fairly similar. Starting off with GP Luffy, I think it's a slightly favored matchup for Bonney. So you can see the build I'm basing this off of is essentially like a general build, just assuming you have like 3 to 4 ofs for most of your top end 8-cost Kid. You got Shanks, you got 3 to 4 Hody, you're maybe running 5-cost Smoker or 10-cost Dofi, but just a very general build, right? So, and then for all of these, I kind of specify, like for Shanks, there's kind of 2 main builds at the moment, and I'll talk about any like nuances or specific things as I go. But basically, GP Luffy, I think, is slightly favored. If the Luffy player has techs for Bonney, it can make it much more closer to 50-50. And if the player is really, really good, it can be kind of hard for Bonney. But just in general, it's favored matchup. Teach is just rough, with especially with people just kind of being more on the tech for doing playing the 4-cost Shiryu that just really just KOs Tashigi on curve, and if they have a finger pistol or black hole to back it up for the next couple of turns, it's just, there's not much you can do. It's hard to even rely on like 9-cost Zoro if the Blackbeard player knows how to play around it and like set up to KO it the turn after you play. Just a rough matchup until we get the 1-cost event from OP012. Thank you, Bandai. That was actually kind of sick. Can't wait to use that if I hit a Teach in the future. Shanks, I know a lot of people are kind of still on the kind of rush aggro mid-tempo kind of build with like 3-cost Sanji and the 5-cost Dream Luffy. So with that type of build with limited KO power, I know they're still running Rayleigh, they're still running Beckman, there's still things like that, 10-cost Shanks, but in that type of build with Bonney, if you're running 3 to 4 9-cost Shanks, if the player knows what they're doing, I think it's fine. I think it's much more close to 50-50. If Shanks is running like a full KO control build, it's much more difficult for Bonney, and definitely slightly unfavored, potentially even unfavored. It just depends how hard they're going into the control aspect or the KO aspect. And the one thing here though is both players are kind of like relying on drawing their unsearchable cards. This is what I always talk about with the Shanks matchup. Shanks really needs to see Rayleigh, and if they're not running Uta, it's hard for them to get their 10-cost Shanks. They need to see Rayleigh, they need to see 7-cost Newgate. Those are all unsearchable. Bonney needs to see 9-cost Shanks, and a lot of times Hody as well. And if they're running Dofi, that's another unsearchable card. So it's kind of like the two decks are both running unsearchable key cards in that matchup. It comes down to a little bit like half of who can draw their unsearchable cards better and then who can play the matchup better. So 50-50 like drawing and 50-50 just like skill level, who can be more efficient with their plays. Zoro, I think, is just favored Bonney. With people teching in Mole Pistol, I think it's definitely a little bit trickier. You have to be careful. But in the end, I think Bonney just has so many tools to fight Zoro. I think it's at the very least slightly favored. Usopp, and this is kind of for Dressrosa build and the like Sokka Usopp newer builds and stuff. I think Usopp is just so dependent on going first, especially in the Dressrosa build. Like, not seeing Stage or Leo just off rip can ruin the game for them. And if the Bonney player is playing 5-cost Bonney or 6-cost Hawkins, it just really helps that matchup out. And I still think Hody is just such a goated card in this matchup, and if the Bonney player knows what they're doing, I think it's pretty much 50-50. It can kind of go either way depending on who wins the dice roll and what build each player is running, but just in general I would say 50-50. Blue Dofi, losing Jinbei basically just took away their biggest ability to go aggro and swarm early game, so that made it much easier for Bonney to deal with. But everyone's running Red Rock now, and also Gravity Blade as well. I think more so on the Red Rock train, but essentially if you just play around Red Rock successfully, it's just, you know, the same old. I think it's still favored against Dofi. Lucci, I would say slightly unfavored. The nice thing is the hit with Moria and Ice Age made it a little bit easier. Their KO power just isn't as much anymore. If they're running stuff like 2-cost Uta and they see it on curve, it definitely just can turn the tides and make it even harder for Bonney. But you know, if they miss even one KO and we hit even a decent curve, honestly, you know, Bonney can win against Lucci a lot. I'm not gonna lie. Lucci has a lot of inconsistency problems that like have, even from before he's been pretty inconsistent, and now it's even worse with like a lot of the builds that people are running now. So, you know, for what it's worth, I think it's just barely just slightly unfavored. Luffy, I would say it's definitely favored for Bonney. Some people might say slightly favored. I don't think anyone can really make the case for 50-50 because Luffy, one, you need to win the dice roll. You need to essentially hit perfect curve. It really helps if you can hit 1 to 2 9-cost moms, and then you essentially need to find your tech card of Gamma Knife to get around Kid successfully. And having all those pieces come together is just very, like, it requires a lot. It's asking for a lot. And just like starting it off with just losing the dice roll, like, you know, if Bonnie's able to take first, even just how much more that matchup goes in the favor of Bonney is enough for me to just completely call that matchup favored. Red Green Smoker, I think, with people, they're going to be teching Mole Pistol and ACOS Kid for Green Purple Luffy. A lot of people will. I know there's like also kind of a more aggro build for Smoker as well, but I don't think that build will be as prominent until OP11. So I'm just assuming everyone's running the more Fortress KO style to take on the Green Purple Luffy matchup. And I would say if the Bonney player is able to just play around Mole Pistol and set up Kid successfully, if you're able to draw Hody, Dofi, 10-cost Dofi is actually a really strong card in that matchup. If you see your carrots to handle their 5-cost smokers, it's really not that hard. If Red Green Smoker sees like multiple Mole Pistols, KOs a 5-cost and has the one for A-cost Kid, if they see a Hody on curve and another one for lethal, like, yeah, they can definitely take the game away. But I think it's a really close matchup where Smoker has a few more tools to deal with Bonnie's board and characters. I think Bonney being a 5-life leader and just having a strong leader effect that also in turn deals with a lot of Smoker's board, kind of just makes it a close to 50-50 matchup now that Smoker can run Mole Pistol. Before, I would say it's definitely slightly favored for Bonney. Now it's much closer to 50-50. But I would still lean towards slightly favored for Bonney. Black Smoker, on the other hand, definitely unfavored. He's a much more consistent leader than Lucci, and it's just like you really gotta hope they either brick, just don't see their Tashigi on curve, no 1-cost Sengokus, no 3-cost Brooks, and you also need to see like a decent curve. It's just, in my opinion, his consistency makes the matchup even worse than Lucci. And if you steal second away from him and you hit a nice curve and he doesn't see like all the pieces he needs, you can definitely win those, but it's just a really hard matchup, especially against a good Smoker player. Lim, I would say the newer Lim builds that just run the 5-cost, 6-cost Swarm definitely make it a little bit harder. This is another one that I think was definitely slightly favored or even just completely favored for Bonney, but I think the new Swarm builds are a little bit more difficult than before. And if they see their 6-cost Sakazuki and they get it down to pop one of our 5 costs, it can be kind of rough. But honestly, I think Bonney has a lot of tools to deal with Lim, and if you actually know how to play the Lim matchup properly and like kind of just like fight for board and drain them resources and then be able to go for lethal later on and kind of control the board with stuff like 9-cost Shanks and 10-cost Dofi if you're running it, kind of just gives Bonney an edge in the end. But just in general, I'd say it's very close to 50-50 because Lim has the ability to put a lot of pressure and put a lot of pressure quickly. And if Bonney can't handle it, you'll lose. But if Bonney like stabilizes and gets rid of Lim's board, then it's definitely becomes more favored for Bonney. Boa, it's always been this. It's just been like this for the past, since we got 3-cost Tashigi for green. The Boa matchup has been much more manageable. Basically, if we have Tashigi on curve or just, within the first 3 turns, we're kind of good. We're feeling good. If we don't have Tashigi, it's definitely unfavored. It's crazy how polarizing the matchup is, but in my opinion, that's just how it goes. Yellow-green Law, I would say, is slightly favored to favored. If they're not running Hody, I think it's just completely favored for Bonney. If they're running Hody, if it's a really good yellow-green Law player, if they know how to play around, if they can take advantage of Bonney's board with Hody and then set up their own kid first and set up a strong kid with that, then it is very difficult sometimes for Bonney. But I would say just in general, slightly favored to favored. Bonney has a lot of tools. Bonney's 8-cost kid is stronger and more defensive than yellow-green Law's. And it requires Bonney to really just not see the pieces. And if Law takes first away from Bonney and has a good curve, hits Hody, hits Kid, I think it can be kind of difficult. But again, that's asking for a little bit. I do think the matchup, Law has a little bit better matchup in OP11 with the 2-cost Zeus. But until then, just at the very least, slightly favored for Bonney. So these are, in my opinion, just the general matchups here. Again, I don't think this is even that important. Most of this is subjective and it's all opinion based, and take everything with a grain of salt. So now let's jump into the actual green-purple Luffy matchup. All right, he's here. He's the boy. He's the new kid on the block. It's green-purple Luffy, really strong leader. Essentially, he's Dawn -2ing to restand 2 of his Dawn, and then he gets plus 1k power. And if you have cards like, the 5-cost Sanji Pudding, then you're recurring that Dawn as active Dawn. It's really strong. This leader can run away with so much value that it's kind of insane. But it does have weaknesses of the fact that he's a 4-life leader. He tends to run a ton of bricks in order to make his deck more efficient, and he is weak to cards like Hody that can rest his Dawn and blockers. So these are the main cards to watch out for as essentially a green deck playing against green-purple Luffy. One, Gamma Knife, obviously just a really good card against Kid, and can even do a lot of damage if you have a rested Cavendish or a 5-cost Smoker. They can just reduce it down to like 1 or 2k and then attack in with a 1-cost Nami, and that hurts a lot. 6-cost Brook, I don't know if you'll see this as much in the Western meta, but this was a very good tech card for Dofi and also the Mirror. Really good at just like giving the -2 to 2 characters, so like making your kid a 6k and just being able to do it every turn if he wants when he's attacking, really strong. And it's a 7k body, so it's really hard for Bonney to get rid of. And then there's 4-cost Zoro. This card is really good at punishing you if you play a chump blocker early, which is something to watch out for and always be careful about when you're playing against green purple Luffy. And then Luna. While Luna is more so for like Dofi and the mirror, it actually is really strong against decks like Bonney and red green smoker, because like half of the main core of our deck comes from like all the 5 costs that we run. And even up to Hody, being able to stun Hody is very strong. And if they like a well-timed Luna against Bonney when they have a rested Cavendish and they were like relying on that Dawn restand to like essentially help them do the things they wanted to do the next turn, you can win the game with a well-timed Luna against a Bonney if they're not really being careful and not playing around it. So that is definitely a card to look out for. And obviously the trigger is devastating. It's an awesome trigger. It's the Punk Gibson trigger, but resting any character is kind of insane and is something you need to play around when you're going for lethal. Just a card to watch out for in the meta and always keep in mind. All right, so these are the key cards against GP. Since I've kind of already gone over these, we'll keep this really brief, but like Arouge, Carrot, Kid are kind of your main players, and then these are kind of like some of your in the chump blockers obviously, and then Dofi and Zoro are kind of like the plan B top end that you have. Again, 9-cost Shanks is good too, but he's not really one of the key cards in the matchup. And here's what I consider to be like what I think will be the main EB02 meta leaders. Obviously I would put Bonney in here too, and red green smoker as well, but since these are like the kind of like the non-green decks plus like green purple Luffy essentially, but kind of just like what we're kind of anticipating and what we might be teching our deck around, right? But since I think green purple Luffy is going to be one of, if not the best deck in format, this is what I want to focus on. Again, quick little shout out to my Metafy. I'm going to have the full guide with like more in-depth stuff for all of these leaders, including red green smoker as well. So please check out the guide and support me if you'd like. So against green purple Luffy for the dice roll, I do think there are ways you could approach this matchup where you would want to go second, but for the most part, I think because our first curve is just so strong as Bonney, we just want to go first. There are things you need to watch out for. Essentially, the perfect curve for green purple Luffy going second would be double search turn 1 or search stage and into Zoro Jiro turn 4, and then on their 6th on turn 3, they play Sanji Pudding, use leader effect, get the 2 Dawn back plus the 1 from Sanji Pudding, which puts them at 4, and they can play down another Zoro Jiro. So it's really strong. We call this like the 4-5-4 over here in Japan. So I don't know if that'll catch on, but watch out for the 4-5-4. They're coming for you. But yeah, that's what you don't want them to hit if they're going second. That essentially, if they go like 4-5-4, and because on their 6th on turn they use Sanji Pudding, they play Sanji Pudding and use leader effect, and they go up to 4 but 5 Dawn total. And then on the next turn they go up to 7, and if they have Luffy Taro, so if they go 4-5-4 7-5 with Luffy Taro into another Sanji Pudding, 1, that's insane. That's a really crazy high roll from them. But 2, it is something you need to watch out for. And if you're giving your opponent the option for like a crazy perfect curve like that, it's just something you need to keep in mind, right? But because we can essentially combat like that perfect curve better with us going first, I think it's okay taking first. But there is a way to like go second and like play a route, like search, play a Rouge on 4, play Cavendish on 6, play Kid on 8, and then play your finishers and stuff like or just beef up your defense on your 10 Dawn turn. Can be very strong, because the nice thing about going from 6 to 8 Dawn when you have Cavendish on board is if you play Kid, you can swing Cavendish knowing that they have to swing into your Kid. But like if you don't have the defenses ready for it, it makes it really hard. It becomes easier to do this second curve for Bonney when you're in a meta where they take out the 4-cost green Zoro, which happened a lot later in late in the EB02 meta and going into OP11. People started to take out 4-cost green Zoro a lot, and that just meant that like as a Bonney player, you were almost safe just playing down a chump blocker on 2. So you could go blocker, Arouge, Cavendish, Kid, and then Zoro after that, like in the OP11 meta, and that is like just like a reverse perfect curve back onto the GP Luffy, right? but I don't want to go on too long about that. In general, I still think first is better, but please experiment, see what you like. I do think it also depends on your build. Unfortunately, I don't think there's a 1000% correct answer here, and I do think it actually depends on your build. So try it out, see what you like. I find to be a little bit more consistently confident going first, but in that case, you really need your Cavendish or 5-cost Smoker on 5 Dawn. Otherwise, it can start to feel bad. And if your GP opponent is hitting their perfect curve, then it's gonna suck. That's the best way I can put it. So for Mulligan, if you're going first, again, Cavendish I think is probably the best play here. Carrot is also very essential, but you don't really want to play Carrot on 5 because you really kind of need that Dawn up to rest one of their characters or leader, right? So Cavendish, in my opinion, is better. And 1-cost Bonney, then Kid, Carrot, and Hody. Going second, I think a really good curve is like Bonney Search, Rouge, Cavendish, Carrot, Kid, Hody. These are the main cards that you need to look out for. So the really basic game plan here is search for Kid and Cavendish early game, set up Carrot and Cavendish in the mid game to control board and prepare for Kid, and then end game with your chump blockers and Kid to defend for a turn or two, then go for lethal with Hody and your remaining characters on board. So that's like the essential kind of game plan that you should have as Bonney, and you're just trying to navigate that as smoothly as possible, right? Now, one thing to note here is like Hody is almost always necessary for lethal if they're leaving up Dawn or have blockers, so it can be difficult to win without him, right? But it's kind of hard to justify a hard mulligan for him since it's such a late game scenario and you have so many opportunities to draw him from turn or the cards that are coming from your life, right? So because of that, I don't think you can hard mulligan for Hody, but some cards to kind of hard mulligan for, one is Cavendish, one is Search, the Bonney Search. A Rouge going second I think is a mulligan. You can mulligan for a Rouge going second. If you have like Bonney Search and Cavendish and Carrot and like some counter, sure, you can keep that, that's fine, right? But if you have like just like 2 Carrots, a Hody, and some counter, I would consider just mulliganing that for Search or Rouge going second, because you're going to be playing slower and more defensively going second, and you need to be able to handle the like them hitting Sanji Pudding on their turn 3 5 Dawn turn and just like snowballing from that. But let's move on. These are the hands and mulligans I was talking about. Again, the main core key cards here are actually Cavendish, Rouge, and Carrot. Kid is similar to Hody, where like really great to have early, like so that you know you have them. But this is why we run 4 Bonney, and this is why I don't think I could run a build that doesn't run 4 of the Searcher Bonney. Is just because like we need a mulligan for these cards, and we need to be able to search out Kid and blockers and counter later on, and like early to mid game, right? But Kid and Hody are not like essential enough, in my opinion, to hard mulligan for. I know that might sound kind of crazy to not mulligan for Kid, but if you don't have enough tempo of your own going into the Kid play, that's how you lose, and that's how you just don't have enough tempo and resources. And one thing I really want to, I've been reiterating this throughout the video, but like, don't just rely on Kid. You're not going to win if you just rely on Kid. That's why we have the plan B with like Dofi and other stuff too. But really your plan A, you're like the early plan A here is just getting a good board set up with characters here. So these are the cards to think about. These are some other combos that you should keep in mind just depending on your build, right? Playing 8-cost Rosie into Cavendish or Carrot is always strong, and 5-cost Smoker too. Like I said, 5-cost Smoker on curve going first feels amazing because you can play like Smoker into one of these afterwards. Potentially like Smoker, Cavendish, Blocker is always really good. And then you can start taking life, like you take the rest of your life and then set up with the Kid after. If you set up a Kid with Smoker, Cavendish, and a blocker or 2 on the board, right? Like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Yeah, that's really strong. That's going to help you win the game. You're going to be able to press for counter with Smoker every single turn. You're going to be able to restand Dawn with Cavendish. If you don't have any of this mid game set up and you just play like Kid Blocker, or even just Kid Blocker, it's going to be really hard for you to finish out the game. That's the main point I want to make here. Another thing with a Rouge and Smoker, if you're running one or both of them in your list, you can feel a lot safer playing Doflamingo because you'll be able to get that 1 Dawn back up more consistently. And then there's 7-cost and 5-cost Bonney here. Again, both great stun cards. This is great off of Rosinante, or if you just don't have a Carrot and you need to stun like a 6-cost Luffy or a 5-cost Sanji Pudding just to get rid of a 7k attack. If you have Cavendish on the board, playing Bonney never really hurts that much. It's really just like a 3 cost. Stunning their Dawn doesn't really do much. I wouldn't focus on that at all, to be honest. Just think of these as like decent stall cards. And this 7k is really nice because it at least requires a 2k from their leader if they're 6k when you're swinging in without any Dawn, which is really nice. So those are essentially like the cards, the hands, the mulligans, the combos to think about. And let's go over kind of like a little bit more in depth, like actual like the game plan for when you're playing against green purple Luffy. All right, these are things to watch out for in the matchup. I apologize if I've said any of this already, but I think it's worth noting again. Playing chump blockers early can be dangerous because of 4-cost green Zoro, so read the meta. See if people are playing 4 green Zoros, it's normally not worth it to play that early chump blocker. You can take the risk, but if they don't have 4-cost Zoro Jiro, they're just going to play green Zoro and punish you for playing the blocker, so it is something you have to kind of keep in mind. Don't swing with Cavendish on set your 7 Dawn turn if you don't feel comfortable that you can defend him the following turn. And even if you know you can, it's normally not worth it, because then you just lose so much counter that you want to be using for Kid. I think one thing that kind of shows you the Bonney players that know the matchup more is when they know when to swing and when not to swing, and how to. It's like when you play an 8-cost Kid standing and you don't turn it sideways because you want your opponent to attack into your life, give you the resources so that you can defend it on the following turn. There's a lot of situations like that where you're gonna think like you're gonna get this FOMO of like wanting to do extra damage, but you're gonna be okay, especially if your opponent's only a 5k leader, if they haven't leader affected yet, just because then you're still getting like the free swing in with leader. As long as you're getting them down to 2 life, you can kind of chill. If they're at 3 life, you might consider it. You really kind of want to get them to 2. That's a sweet spot where you then set up your own board and like start beginning like taking chip shots afterwards once you have like 8-cost Kid on the board already. But yeah, just be wary of the potential risk of losing a Cavendish early and just knowing how much value he's going to get you later on. There are situations where you might just have no other choice and it might be in your best interest to swing with him. So I'm not saying never, I'm just saying don't do it if you know that it's going to be more beneficial for you later to just keep him standing now. 8-cost Kid is your key to winning the matchup, but if you rely too heavily on him, you get punished if they run techs like Gamma Knife or 6-cost Brook. This is what I've been saying over and over in this video, is while he is the key card to winning the matchup, if you don't have a strong board around him, it doesn't really matter, and a good green-purple Luffy player or a Luffy player who is teching properly for the green matchup is going to just destroy you. So be very careful of that. And be ready to change game plans if you don't feel that you can last in the end game. One thing to note here is green purple Luffy runs between like 20 and 28 bricks in their deck. And that's like almost guaranteed just because of the way the deck needs to run. In order for it to actually be strong, you have to take this risk of running a ton of bricks. And because of that, essentially you'd be surprised sometimes with how much your lethal is going to go through. They rely so heavily on Gum Gum Giant in order to cycle the cards and get rid of their counter list that if you deny them that with Hody, I've had games where I just had like leader Cavendish and I play Hody, swing 7 with Cavendish, say they had a Dawn and a blocker, they weren't able to, they didn't play around Hody or something like that, they have no Dawn up, no blockers, I go 7 with Cavendish, restand 2, and I have 4, I go 8 with Hody and then 9 with leader, and even if they have like 1 or 2 life, it gets through. It's crazy how much sometimes they just don't have counter. So be ready to change your game plan and have like the balls to just like go for lethal sometimes. Here's some other tips for the matchup. For the most part, ignore their board and just go for life. It's really hard for us to clear their 6 and 7k characters, and in the end, if they have the counter, we get punished so hard because then they keep everything alive, and you're probably swinging all of our we're probably turning our character sideways in order to do that, and then they just punish us back. And they can always build a stronger like mid-tempo swarm board than we can, obviously. So it's very risky. Playing out Cavendish and 1-cost Beige will almost always ensure that your Cavi or Carrot the next turn or 2 will survive. So it's pivotal to have some kind of blocker down by your 6 to 8 Dawn turn. This is something to keep in mind. Again, like if you don't have to swing with Cavendish, but a lot of the time you're gonna really kind of need to swing with Carrot because just the value of blocking one of their characters is always going to be worth it. So if you have the chump blocker down beside them, it gives you a little bit of a safety net. So this is something to look out for, and something you can do with the extra Dawn. If you play Cavendish on 5, swing 5 with leader, and then with one of the 2 extra Dawn, play a beige. The next following turn, you still don't swing with Cavendish, but you like play a carrot, right, or something like that. And then the following turn after that, you can swing with one or both of them, because you know you have one blocker at least. You might have played another one by the next turn. I know this is kind of like just making up a bunch of scenarios, but these are the things you're gonna be facing and need to look out for. Feel free to take the first life or 2, but if you end up taking too much too quickly, you risk a sneak attack lethal with something like 6 cost Luffy, so be careful how much you take. Attacks that can be countered with essentially 1 card are okay to defend if need be. So if you take the first life, you're feeling fine. You take the second life, you're feeling fine, and then they swing like another 5. You should probably counter out of that one, right? You need to keep cards for Kid, but you need to also make sure you don't go down too quickly, especially because there's always combos like stuff like the 2 cost Makusen, the Ashura event, that can boost their 6 cost Luffy. So you might have been expecting like an 8k or a 9k attack twice, but then can all of a sudden it just becomes a 10k twice. And if you don't do the math for that, you can just get caught with your pants down, and then they go for lethal and they win. Some other tips: be cognizant when your opponent could play a well-timed Luna, and don't swing with your Cavi if you don't need to. Again, this is like such an important point here. Carrot, obviously, like I said, is okay to swing sometimes, just because like the value of stunning them is going to be worth it. It's not like you're just not swinging the entire game, but like Cavendish is such an important card in the late game that I think it's really important. And if you can put down 2 blockers with your 8 cost Kid and one of them is 2 cost Rosie, you don't have to worry about Gamma Knife as much. And I just mean like not as much, right? If you have 2 blockers down and one of them is 2 cost Rosie, you have a much better shot of surviving, but you are probably losing both of those blockers and potentially like a good chunk of counter out of your hand. So you need to do the math of like, is it worth it to save Kid, or do I just try and like save my 2 blockers, lose Kid? And if you say you have like 2 other chump blockers in your hand, sometimes it's better to just let Kid go and then play out like another blocker or 2, right? But that's something that's going to depend completely on the board state and is up to you as a player to judge. And like I said before, remember that GP runs a ton of counter lists, and keep track of how much counter is in their trash and what they've cycled. Sometimes a 6 or 7 card hand only has like 3 or 4k counter if they can't use their Gum Gum Giant. So they have 6 cards in hand. They have a 1k, a 2k, Brick Giant, right? So if you take away that Dawn, what should have been like 4k plus 6k, 7k, and potentially up to 9k, 11k, so what had like the potential to be 11k hand turns into a 3k hand. That's how strong Gum Gum Giant is, because we're calculating for the highest potential of those 2 cards that we draw being like 2/2ks off of the Gum Gum Giant, which is a lot of the times they Gum Gum Giant and they draw 2 counterlists. That's just the way it goes playing like green purple Luffy, and when that happens you're happy as their opponent. But sometimes, dude, they just draw 2/2ks off of it, and like they more than tripled the amount of counter like kind of that was in their hand, right? From, if you consider the Gum Gum Giant to be like from 0 being a dead card, right? So if they have no counter, or if they have no Dawn, the amount of counter in their hand like exponentially becomes so much lower. If they play around Hody, leave up 3 Dawn, and you can only rest 2, then you have to account for the fact that they're going to be getting obviously the Gum Gum Giant off from a 6k leader becoming 10, but they're also potentially just drawing more counter off of that. So it's something you have to consider, but don't be afraid to go for lethal if you know you're going to lose the next turn. I think sometimes people just, if you play to not lose and don't play to win, then you're gonna get punished. So try and do the math the best you can to be like, will I actually survive this? I suggest playing green purple Luffy a lot if you're a Bonney player. I love this leader, it's really fun. I've been playing him a lot in OP11. I finally built him. Took me a long time, but I finally got the cards to build this leader. And one thing I could say is like, just play this leader and learn what the hands are like, learn what the curve is like, play against your friends on Bonney as green purple Luffy, and you'll see like how daunting the task can seem as the green purple Luffy player. It may seem scary as the Bonney player because of like how much firepower they have, but man, it is definitely a favored matchup for Bonney, and the green purple Luffy player has to work really hard to win that. and they have to see like a decent curve and draw well, and or see their tech cards on time. But yeah, that's something to just consider, and I think ties in here. These are just general tips and suggestions, but it's up to you to learn the matchup and perfect it with your own playstyle and build. Not everything I said here is going to apply to you. If you have a different playstyle, if you like to use a different list, it's not going to apply. Like, it's just not everyone can, have the same. Not everything that helps one person will help the other person, right? But I think these are just like general things to look out for. A lot of the things I was stressing like 4 or 5 different times are what I consider to be like the most important thing. And if you just learn the fundamentals of the matchup and how to be patient and not freak out, don't swing your characters when you shouldn't, you can really take advantage of how the like Fortress 8 cost kid plan can really just put a complete halt to green purple Luffy. And I implore you to try out like the 9 cost Zoro play and stuff like that too, so you can see like the different ways that you can actually play against this leader. And again, just for a further in-depth guide on the matchup and some of the other main matchups in EB02 for Bonney, check out my Metafy coming soon. I already have it made, so please, I'll have it linked in the description below. But if you've been watching this far, I really want to say thank you so much. These guides take me a really long time to make, and I try to put like 1000% of my effort into it, and I don't ever want to put out a guide like this that I don't feel proud of. So that's partly why I figured it would be better to make the other part of this, like this is already over an hour long. This would be this is why I wanted to consolidate the main points here in the green purple Luffy matchup on this video, and then I wanted to have other stuff you guys can read as the written guide, and something to use kind of like as a cheat sheet that you can check, like what was that mulligan again, or am I supposed to take first or second, like what was the key card in this matchup, like things that you can go back and look for. Even if you're an experienced Bonney player, I think it's another viewpoint, another point of view, another player's take on it. So I implore you to check it out. It's going to be free. So yeah, I really appreciate anyone who goes and follows me on Metafy, or if you get the guide or support me in any way, I really appreciate it. And yeah, thanks for watching. Check out the other YouTube videos on my channel. I'm streaming on YouTube and Twitch. We're doing multi-streaming 2 to 3 times a week. Obviously playing a ton of Bonney. I've been playing a lot of GP Luffy too. So if you're interested in that, please check it out. Again, a big thank you. I really appreciate it. Consider liking and subscribing to the channel, checking out everything else. But just for now, just thank you so much, and I'll catch you guys in the next one. Peace.